Hope you're ready for another episode of You're All Doomed, the podcast that tunnels its way through the killer cut of the Friday the 13th reboot, 13 minutes at a time. I'm Wood Wizard Greg.
And I'm Brian.
And this segment starts with Jenna with her hand over her mouth and ends with Bree about to put her crotch over Trent's mouth.
Clay and Jenna are still hiding underneath the rack of canoes when Jason stops right in front of them and drops a headless dead body. As the body hits the floor, Jason notices Clay's backpack and is like, what the shit? So for this headless body, we can presume that it's maybe Chelsea, maybe Nolan, but neither of them had their heads cut off. But this is clearly a headless body wearing a flannel shirt, and I can't quite figure out who it is.
So I think this is the question that I referred to earlier. It's a remnant of the alternate version of Donnie's death, where his head was cut off wearing the hockey mask.
Oh, right, yeah.
So it doesn't line up with what was actually used in the film, but maybe after slitting Donnie's neck and putting the hockey mask on, Jason then cut off Donnie's head for some reason.
So after seeing Clay's backpack, Jason does this really cool ass move where he walks over to a switch and illuminates the whole camp with floodlights. I
loved that. We don't get a whole lot of Jason using technology unless it's to shut down a generator or something. But that was pretty sweet.
Yeah, I liked it because it's kind of like the beginning of his like full-on berserker mode. He like storms over, turns on the light switch, the whole camp lights up, and then he just starts like knocking each canoe off the racks, and he's just like, God damn it, yeah. Who is at my camp?
He is getting pissed. Fortunately, Jenna and Clay had already managed to dart to safety and hide behind the archery targets. They see Jason look around fruitlessly, then pick up the body and the knapsack and stomp off into the darkness. And I always love it when people are watching Jason without him knowing it. Clay wants to follow him, but Jenna convinces him that they really need to go back and warn everybody.
As they're running away, Jenna accidentally trips on a rope that we see rings a bell somewhere underground. That's when we cut underground, and we find ourselves traveling through some crudely made tunnels. After going down various paths, we end up in a bedroom of sorts where we see an alive, but not necessarily well, Whitney padlocked to the bed.
Yeah, she's being held captive like April O'Neil. Apparently this is the old mine that was briefly mentioned earlier, and Jason has a little cozy kingdom set up down here. He returns home, chucks the body he's carrying into a nearby cavern, though it's not clear exactly why he's keeping it. Then, like any good craftsman, he sits down at a sharpening wheel and hones his machete. I don't hate that, but it seems a little anal retentive for Jason.
Especially considering that just like minutes earlier, he was trying to find an intruder, and now he's kind of just going back to mundane tasks, and I feel like he would still be pissed off and trying to find these people, but he gives up pretty quickly and he's like, well, I'm just going to go do some chores now.
As he's sharpening the blade, he's flashing back to his mother's beheading. And it reminds us that this is in fact the machete that killed his mother, which I'm not crazy about because it puts a little too much emphasis on Jason's machete. I always liked it more when it's just another tool that he stumbles upon and uses interchangeably with whatever's laying around. But this is like it's his signature sidearm or something like that. He does get his temper ramped up and then throws a Citizen Kane-style tantrum, chucking wash tubs all over the place. Jason's freakout is causing Whitney to scream, so he charges over and grabs her, but sees the locket that's hanging around her neck. He stares at it wistfully, and she whispers, Jason, it's okay. His head snaps up looking at her, and then he splits.
Whitney sees the backpack lying on the ground and starts to rummage through it, and she quickly notices the flyers and immediately knows that it's Clay's. She finds the GPS and kind of like MacGyver's it and starts to take it apart until she's able to pull out one of the wires, which she uses to pick open the padlock, which allows her to free herself from the chains. Whitney then makes a break for it through the labyrinth of tunnels and eventually ending up in a room filled with discarded bodies.
And one of them, I think, is Mike, her boyfriend.
I looked really closely at the bodies, and I couldn't recognize any of them. I'm not saying that Mike wasn't in there, but you think you saw him there?
I think that he's like the one closest to the screen. The rest of them are pretty hard to distinguish, but it looked like that one had curly hair.
Okay. It makes sense because that's why I paused it, because I figured if they're going to show that many bodies that there was going to be at least one in there that we recognized. But so, yeah, I'm glad that you saw Mike.
And again, I wonder why he's bothering to hang on to them unless it's just to conceal his murders.
That's probably it. Yeah. Because, I mean, the cop said that they never found any evidence that the kids were even there. So he's clearly
cleaning up after himself.
He's good at disposing of any evidence.
This whole sequence with Whitney escaping is the biggest difference between the theatrical and the killer cuts. I get the sense that they created it because they realized that Whitney's not really in this movie very much until much later. And they had this scene of her escaping just so that we get to know her a little bit more, but it got lifted out of the theatrical version. And I think, as we'll see, it doesn't really go anywhere. And I think it was wise to trim it. Jenna and Clay seem to be taking a really long time getting back as Jason is trailing them, but this allows Whitney the time to escape through one of the trapdoors and leave the camp entirely.
Over at Trent's house, Bree is sipping from a bottle of champagne while doing a seductive solo dance. And I hate to say it, Bree, but you ain't got nothing on Crispin Glover. Although it is rather funny that Lawrence and Chewie are a captive audience to this dancing display. And Chewie even says that in his next life he wants to come back as one of the buttons on the ass pocket of her jean shorts. Lawrence tells him to go over and talk to her, but he says he has a better chance of fucking a penguin than her this weekend. So I want to know where this penguin is. And instead, Chewie holds up a flaming shot and makes a toast to daddy issues and fucking douchebags. He walks up to Bree and she shows him how to drink the shot in kind of like a seductive manner. And Chewie places the still flaming Moe shot glass to his mouth, which of course burns the shit out of his lip. And this causes Chewie to fall backwards and break a chair. Trent storms in and tells us that was his dad's chair and that it was a family heirloom. But Chewie says that he can fix it and he just needs some tools. So Trent sends him down to the tool shed.
I did laugh at Chewie's joke that they don't call him the Wood Wizard because he masturbates a lot.
Right. Chewie's now in the tool shed, which is utterly massive, and even makes a comment as such about the tool shed being bigger than most people's houses. He's wandering around and he finds a cabinet filled with booze. He pulls out a bottle of Lagavulin, which is a single malt scotch that ranges in price from about $85 to up to $400 a bottle. But Chewie doesn't hesitate to take a couple of swigs from the bottle before putting it back in the cabinet.
Back up at the house, Bree has made her move on Trent and begun straddling him. They both prepare to enter the race for mayor of Moistville.
Population 2.
Another episode with no deaths, I'm afraid.
Why are we even bothering?
That's a good question, Brian.
To hear which part of Bree's jean shorts I want to come back as in my next life, tune in next week for the next episode of You're All Doomed.